And hopefully, if all things worked, should be live. We are. Yes. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable finally after like a month and a half of no roundtables. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. And the ultimate goal of this little podcast is to learn a little something from each other. If you're listening live and want to be a little part of this shindig, send a tweet to PHP Roundtable with a question, and we'll try to get your question answered live on the show if we can. You may have heard of Zend Framework, but did you know that there are a lot more things going on with Zend, and there's lots more things with the Zend name on them? Today we're chatting with a couple of Zend nerds about the Zend ecosystem, from Apigility to Zend Certification and Zend's role in PHP internals. So we're going to find out what's all about Zend. So now that we know what we're talking about, let's meet our panel in no particular order. We'll start off with Mr. Adam Culp. He's the Zend Professional Services Consultant, South Florida PHP User Group Organizer, and Sunshine PHP Organizer. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to getting this going here.
Absolutely. And we also have Cal Evans. He's the nerd herder to the worldwide herd. He gave me that as his one-liner intro, and I was so afraid I was going to screw it up. It was like saying one of those tongue twisters. But thank you, Cal, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My role at Zend is actually I'm head of training and the Zend Certification. So,
excellent. And we also have Gary Hockin, who I think he was the one who beat up all the other people who were supposed to be on the panel and put himself on there last minute. So welcome, Gary. He's the developer advocate of PHP Storm and on the community review team at Zend. Hello, Gary.
Hello. I am not on the community review team at Zend. I am on the community review team at Zend Framework, which is a completely different thing. But it's all good. Hello, Sammy. How are
you? Words are important. I left that one off. So there were a number of other people who were going to be joining us today, but some last-minute life things happened. And in fact, if you've been wondering why we haven't had a PHP Roundtable, or they've been like kind of, we've had them, but they've just been sort of like sporadically scheduled, not like consistently 2 every month like I like to have. It's been doomed. It's been cursed. Like literally, like every time I send out like a try to line up people's schedule and like, hey, what times work best for you? Like none of them line up, and it's just been like so crazy. So I'm really happy that that you three were able to come out and join us, especially since Gary was last minute. He was able to step in, and so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining, guys.
You're welcome. The pleasure's all ours.
Awesome. I know it's always yours, Gary, because you're always ready to add your little sarcastic remarks into everything. So,
are you trying to say that I'm a mouth for hire, Sammy? Is that what it is?
You're lovely. You're a lovely person. So this is the first time
lovely person.
This is the first time that we're doing a kind of like a framework ecosystem specific PHP Roundtable. I know we've done some live episodes like at Laracon and things like that, but I haven't really had like sort of looking at some of these framework ecosystems specifically. So I was actually sitting down with Adam at where was that? That was at Pacific Northwest PHP.
Yeah, in Seattle.
Yeah, and we were and we were just kind of chatting about ideas that we could talk about on the roundtable, and he was like, "Why don't you have a Zend one?" I was like, "Oh, that's such a great idea. I never even thought about like maybe we could do like a Zend one, and maybe do like a Symphony one, and do like a Laravel one, and like all kinds of ones." So we're kicking it off with Zend. And I just said Zend a bunch of times, but Cal just recently tweeted something that he's going to correct me and say why we're not going to say Zend. We're going to say Rogue Wave. What's up with that?
These days, we are Rogue Wave software. Rogue Wave purchased Zend this year, right? Right, Adam? Last year?
More than a year ago, actually.
More than a year ago. Okay. They've had such a light touch. It's really difficult to keep track. But it's a wonderful company to work for. But we are Rogue Wave now, and Zend is the product line that we work on. So Adam and I and a bunch of other wonderful people work on the Zend product line inside of Rogue Wave. and we have several different product lines. We just announced that we purchased another company that does API monitoring and things like that, and I'm real excited about that. But yeah, we do have a lot going on at RogueWave, and Zend is just one part of it.
Awesome. So Zend used to be the overarching company, but now it's the product line under RogueWave?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and not only are there products, but there's also services behind that, right? I mean, because Zend is the enterprise entity, so to speak, behind PHP, whereas you have Red Hat and Canonical helping you with Linux, and you also have RogueWave helping you with Linux open source support. Zend is the support for PHP. So if you're doing enterprise PHP and you want one throat to choke, you want somebody to help take care of your PHP for you, make sure that as an enterprise level company, or any company for that matter, that wants somebody to fall back on if something goes wrong, Zend is that company for PHP, or Zend is that product for PHP. RogueWave. Yeah.
So it's okay to keep saying Zend then, right?
Yeah.
All right,
Sure.
cool. Just wanted to make sure. So where did this start? Where does Zend? I know a lot of people have heard of Zend Framework, but maybe have not heard about the what used to be the company that's surrounding it and where it got started. What's the history behind that?
Well, we had originally assigned this question to Matthew, but he had a family emergency and could not be with us. So I'm going to give it a shot, but Adam, you chime in when I get something wrong. The story I heard was that there were these two young college students, Andy Gutmans and Zev Saraski, and they were working on a university project, and they submitted it to their teacher, and it was basically what we now know as the Zend engine. It was a precompiler for Zend, or for PHP, and he accepted it with the condition that they made it into an open source project. And so that's how we got the Zend engine. And then Andy and Zev said, hey, we can form a company around this and help other companies enter into the PHP space. And so for the longest time, Zend was the company behind a lot of what was going on in PHP, and then we started getting other participants in the PHP ecosystem. It's grown quite large now, and then RogueWave is a company that is very interested in supporting open source, and so they, in addition to the other things that they do to support open source, they said, hey, let's purchase Zend. It fits very nicely with where we're going. Did I get any of that right, Adam?
Yeah, a couple things. No.
Andy and Zev, I got those two right. That's
exactly. No, I mean, and that's pretty much it. I mean, the company kind of grew from that. They built other products around, and making it more accessible to companies, that wanted to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
So Zend really came out of PHP internals then?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And Zend was, I guess, the name was created by Andy.
But I don't know who created it, but it's definitely it's the ZE in Zev and the ND in Andy. Right? So they combined it together to come up with the name Zend.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense now. All right. Well, so every time you pop open PHP internal source code and you start looking around, you just see Zend everywhere. There's a Zend folder. Everything's like Zend parse parameters. There's ZF, or not ZF, but just Z something. Like there's ZVal, like so many, like just Zend everywhere. Is that because they rewrote basically PHP's engine at some point and just kind of branded it all with Zend?
Yeah, so back in they were getting ready for PHP 3, I believe was the version, and as they were doing that, Zev and Andy had really rewritten the engine to become the future of PHP, right? And at that time is when they were coming up with the company name and all that. So they said, you know what, since we are writing that core and there is the company behind it, why wouldn't we name it accordingly, right? So as they were building parts of that, the Zend name just went in to identify it. At that time, from what Zev had told me, and again, I'm regurgitating some of this information, so I'm sorry if some of it's wrong. Please don't take me as verbatim on everything. It's not the Bible, but the thing is at that moment they were thinking, you know what, there might be other vendor spaces within PHP. There might be other prefixes that need to be added. So at that point, they said, okay, Zend is taking care of these ones, so we're going to put Zend on the beginning of them, and that's kind of where it came from. It didn't doing the third-party additions to PHP didn't really take off the way they thought that it might have, but that's why the Zend name is prepended to those items.
It was much less a brilliant marketing strategy and much more a technical necessity.
So, what is Zend's sort of relationship with internals now? Is Zend pretty involved with internals as it goes forward? Because I know PHP internals is still very much a community led thing. What's Zend's role in that?
Adversarial. No, I'm kidding. Adam, you want to fill that one?
Yeah, so I can do a little bit, and I think you can share some too. So Zend pays the payroll of a few people who happen to be core contributors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have some people who have contributed a lot to the PHP engine or the Zend engine in PHP and PHP itself, who happen to be on Zend payroll. And so Zend has been a big part of that. We also the company, many of those people also take part in the internals and the conversations happening. Some of the decision making when it comes to voting and things like that. So yeah, I mean, Zend has always been a pretty. I don't want to make it sound like it's like they dictate anything, because that is not the case. But they do have a major. Part in everything, because that is what Zend does. Zend contributes that thing, as Zend contributes many things to that, as well as the open source community at large. Yep, go ahead, Gal.
Let me tell the Dimitri story. I love this one. Now, I have no firsthand knowledge of this, but this is the story as I heard it. First of all, it is wonderful that we have a couple of core contributors on staff at Rogue Wave as part of Zend, because first of all, it does say we're contributing back. For me personally, as head of training, what that means is if there is any question about how something works in PHP, if one of my trainers has any question at all, I've got a core contributor I can go to immediately and say, what's the true answer to this? And Dimitri's been able to help us flesh out some of our training. And to the best of my knowledge, we're the only training organization training PHP developers with a core contributor. But Dimitri is my favorite because PHP 7, the story that I heard, and again, I'll preface this with this could simply be lore, but the story that I'm going to tell, Dimitri was working on this on his own time. And he started thinking, well, what can we do to speed PHP up? And so he said, well, can I do this? No, can I do that? And for what I heard was for about 6 to 9 months on his own time, outside of his core work and outside of his Zend work, he was just working on this. And he hit upon a way, if I got the story right, I hit upon a way of passing the data structures around that if he changed this, it sped PHP up about twice as fast. Not quite twice, but very close to it. And so since he worked, at that time we were all Zend, and he was answering to Zev, one day he goes to Zev and say, hey, I've sped PHP up basically twice as fast. Are we interested in this at all? And of course Zev's eyes, bugged out and everything. And he said, yes, of course we're interested. And so that became the basis of PHP 7. Now, a lot of other people contributed, and there have been some more things that have sped PHP 7 and even PHP 7.1 up. But that's the story that I heard that was the genesis of what we now have as PHP 7.
And when he was working on that was called PHP-NG, right? The next generation or something like that?
That was his internal name for it, yeah. Just because he had to name it something.
So that's Dimitri Stogov. Is that how you say his name? Stogov? Dimitri Stogov?
Yes.
Let's say yes.
Yes.
It's as close as I'm going to get being an English speaker.
I do remember the kind of conversations that were happening at that time, because the HHVM was having a significant influence on or impact on the way that internals was being run at the time. And HHVM is run on a just-in-time compiler, a JIT. And I think there was some big discussions on like, oh, is PHP 7 going to have a JIT? Is it going to have a JIT? Well, it ended up not having a JIT, but it was still twice as fast. But there was a little birdie who told me that PHP 8 might be having a JIT. A GIF. It might have a GIF in it. I don't know, but it might also have a JIT. And the same Dimitri Stogov is apparently working on this branch, right? Is there any details that we can learn about this little JIT that might be happening in PHP 8?
No. No.
I can say something just to prove I'm still here. So the problem with just-in-time compiling is that they look really, really good on the benchmarks, and in real-world code examples, they tend to be much less impressive. I know there's been a JIT developed that is fairly impressive in the lab, but I think I read Andy tweeted about it, or Zev, sorry, which Zev must have tweeted. Maybe it was Andy, even though he's not at RogueWave anymore, I believe. But he tweeted and said exactly that. Look, don't get excited about this, because just because you're seeing like a 20 to 50% increase in benchmarks, when you come to real world code, that might not even translate to like 1%. So I know it's in the works, but I wouldn't particularly be getting all sort of dancing around the room about it yet, because the progression from theory to actual practice with just in time is a big step.
Well, and if Dimitri is working on it, then he's working on it again, because we did experiment with this before 7 came out. Back in the early days of 7 development, there was work on a JIT, but Gary's exactly right. Once you got it into real world performance testing, you didn't see that much of a bump. And Andy used to, when Andy was with us, no, he's not passed away or anything. He's just not at RogueWave. But when Andy was at RogueWave, he used to do a keynote where he talked about how we got to PHP 7, and he talked about the fact that yes, we've looked at this, but we couldn't see any significant improvement. Now, from what I understand, yes, they've picked it back up, even though 7 gave us a huge improvement. 7.1 has given us even more improvements, and they won't say if it's going to go in a 7 branch or an 8 branch. It really depends on whether it's going to break any BC as to where it will go. I mean, if they do find that they can improve the performance significantly and it doesn't break BC, then they'll put it in the 7 branch.
Which will be kind of confusing for the internals people, I guess, right? Because that's usually a BC on the internal side.
Now, that possibility, yeah. But when we talk about BC, we usually talk about userland BCs.
Right. Absolutely. And I noticed it was being developed in the opt cache extension. And so that was kind of curious. I did reach out to Dimitri a little bit before this and asked him if he would be interested in coming on. He is interested in coming on, but he said later, when some more development has been done on that. So you might be seeing a PHP roundtable talking about specifically what Dimitri's been working on in PHP.next. Well, we don't know if it's going to be .8.
I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, because he's still doing so much for it. I mean, he's doing all the patch reviews and everything for PHP currently. Anything for the Zend engine, let me rephrase that. And and he's doing a lot of other things. Like I said, it's also renewed in investigation into the JIT. So I think there's still things coming there, but that remains to be seen.
It should be noted that if there are any differences in between what I've said and what Dimitri eventually says, everything I'm saying should be treated as rumor and hearsay. Okay.
So shifting gears a little bit and talking more about userland, we have this framework that Zend has provided us, open source framework, the Zend framework. Now, there's all kinds of frameworks out there. Zend is one of the major players, and I'm just curious from a perspective. So I'm not a Zend guy. So just from the perspective of somebody who hasn't used Zend, what does Zend framework offer that you don't see in other frameworks?
So, I mean, before we get started on that, I just wanted to kind of segue a little bit and just say that, Zend Framework is, although it is one of the major players, it is one of the more quiet frameworks out there, right? You don't hear a lot about it. It's not really in your face the way that some others might be, but by no means does that mean that it's used less. It doesn't mean that it's not able to handle things, right? I mean, it is used by many large Fortune 500 companies, and it definitely holds its own, does a great job, and the new modernizations in it really make it a lot easier to use. I mean, the Zend Framework team, originally when Zend Framework was created, the idea was to make it a component-based library or a component-based framework. And in Zend Framework 1, that didn't really happen the way it was originally envisioned. But then it was Zend Framework 2. We've slowly been getting it more and more that way. Now it is completely componentized. Everything's separated out as of 2.5. something. And now in Zend Framework 3, it's also separated. I think also another thing to note is with Zend Framework 2 and 3, we're not so much focused on the version these days as we are just saying you're using Zend Framework, because now the difference between Zend Framework 1 and Zend Framework 2 are pretty major, but the difference is functionality wise. It's just these days it's pretty much, are you using Zend Framework, not are you using Zend Framework 1 or 2, right? But with that being said, I think Gary can answer a little bit more about this. About the question that was really asked.
Of course, yeah. So I've been using Zend Framework since Zend Framework 1.10, or 1.9 actually, which is a long time ago. But for me, the reason that I started using Zend Framework over any of the other frameworks, because there were plenty about back then, is I stepped into it because we were already using Zend Guard. So we had a pre-existing relationship with the company. Therefore, for me, there was immediate trust in that brand. So that's the reason that I kind of slipped into using Zend Framework. I don't think it's better or worse than things like Symphony. It has a very similar mentality of Symphony, where it's configuration over magic. It's more about making sure that things are maintainable in the future. So it definitely promotes best practices and maintainability over rapid development and magic, which is completely suitable for some projects, and other projects it's not the kind of thing you'd want. So it's definitely sort of horses for courses. And as Adam said, I've worked in huge companies. I've worked in UK government projects. It's quietly and unobtrusively being used in huge corporations all over the world. And I think that's because it's backed by Zend, which are an established long-term PHP brand. I mean, I don't necessarily think that in the real world means anything, but it's more of a perception than it is an actuality. But it's a good perception, right? And it's just a modern component-oriented MVC framework, but also it's so much more than that now, because you have Apigility, which is a really, really straightforward, opinionated API creation framework. And then Zend Expressive, which is kind of like our middleware-based micro framework type affair. So it's got everything that all the other frameworks had. And for me, because I really like working, I mean, Matthew Weirafini does an amazing job running that project. It's a thankless task. I see Cal saluting there. This Supreme Allied Commander, yeah. He does an absolutely amazing job. Him and Enrico are employed full-time by Zend to work on the framework, which is just plainly not enough people, let's be honest, because there's, like, I don't know, there's 5-6 full products now. But Matthew's such an amazing guy to work with. I absolutely, like, if it wasn't for Matthew, I wouldn't be working at JetBrains now, doing a job I love, and, you know, sat in a hotel in Munich. So, because the reason that I came because of a prior relationship with Zend, but I stayed because contributing to the framework is absolutely fantastic fun. And working with Matthew is one of the highlights of my, like, if I get to work with Matthew, like I did on a bunch of features for the recently released Service Manager, it's the best time to work. You know, he teaches me so much. He's so patient. He's just been, like, you know, amazing to work with. So it's not going anywhere. I'm looking forward to the PHP 7 or 7.1 only port of Zend Framework, which I think will come sooner rather than later. That's kind of what's excited me.
The 7 point. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and something that Gary kind of hinted at there is, you know, in the newer versions of Zend Framework, you know, the refactor of the Service Manager and the Event Manager have greatly improved the speed of it. I mean, Zend Framework is so fast these days, you know, doing the same operations it was doing before, right? But now people are able to leverage those and not have to worry about some of the speed implications on some of the lighter parts of their application.
So Zend has this sort of like this, we kind of mentioned just a little bit earlier when we were talking about just sort of what Zend Framework has to offer that other frameworks don't. And we kind of alluded to the fact that Zend is sort of more, has more like a corporate niche and sort of enterprisey. Is that, I'm just curious, because I heard that Microsoft was investing in internals for a while there. Is is there any relationship between what Microsoft was investing in and why Zend is so corporate enterprisey? Or is that totally not related at all?
That's a good question. I don't know anything on that, so I can't really answer to anything on that. Anybody else?
Nope. I mean, back in the day, we used to partner with Microsoft on a lot of stuff, but I don't think that really focused us anything. I think our partnership with IBM has been long-term much more focused, much more influential on the company. We worked with IBM to put PHP on the IBM I, and of course, Zend Server runs on IBM I also, and there's a lot of companies that are moving their mainframe and minis to the web simply by using PHP, which opened up a lot of doors for PHP developers to go into these companies and work with them.
Now, that being said, I mean, we did have some partnership with Windows at some point where, I mean, now PHP on Windows is not so abhorribly slow the way it used to be, right? So
yeah, but is that us or is that Pierre and Elizabeth Smith?
I don't know that.
Because Microsoft pays Pierre to work on that, and Liz Smith is kind of the community cheerleader for PHP on Windows. She for the longest time I thought she was the one that Microsoft paid, because anytime I was PHP and Windows, I was talking to Liz. But no, sorry, Pierre. That's that's how I learned it. But now I know that he's doing a lot of the work on it. Like I said, we used to back in when I was at Zend the first time, 2006 through 2008. I know we had partnerships with Microsoft to help PHP get more accepted, and we worked with them. Remember, I don't know if they still have it because I don't use Windows, but they used to have that installer. They rolled out in either Windows 7 or Windows 8. They had this whole big installer where you can install web pieces and web components, and we worked with them to get PHP included in that, so that it would be easy for people to say, yes, I want IIS, but I also want PHP, that kind of stuff.
IIS being the Microsoft's Apache or Nginx, basically, the servers.
Yeah, you can still see it in the Smithsonian.
I've installed PHP on Windows recently. It's actually incredibly painless. I mean, it's
cool,
massively painless. And yes, thank you to everyone who's driven that, because it really, I mean, I've only did it for development purposes, and I wouldn't kind of consider a Windows server, but I just wouldn't want to pay the license. But it's really painless to do. So yeah, don't be put off by that.
Well, I will say this, back in the day, and I keep saying that, but 2007 is when I remember them starting to wake up. Microsoft really sat up and took notice of PHP and the PHP community, and they used to host an event for us every year up at Redmond, and they started listening to us, and they started becoming very active. It was obvious that they had noticed that ASP was not gaining traction, but PHP was growing like wildfire, and it became obvious to them that they needed it to work on Windows too. And we had some very interesting conversations in those closed door meetings where we they would say, well, what do we need to do? And we would lay it all out for them. And then the next year, sometimes they would come back and say, well, what do we need to do? And I was like, okay, here's the list from last year. No, they listened to us. Microsoft is very slow in moving because of the size of the corporation. But if you've been watching since about 2007 on through modern day, you could see that Microsoft has turned the ship. And not only with PHP but with open source, they're very pro as to when in 2006, 2007 they were very anti-open source.
Well, in the consulting that I do with Zend, there are many large companies out there that are using Windows for their web servers. Granted, that's not a majority of the market, of course, but there are quite a few companies running that, and we provide support. With Zend Server and PHP and everything on the Windows infrastructure, and so it is a thing.
I find it fun that we can now say that with a straight face, because there used to be a time where you couldn't say, I've got customers using Windows servers on the net without either snickering or doing a facepalm. But these days it is a acceptable platform, just like the other ones that are out there.
So I actually forgot to ask, kind of shifting gears, sorry to jump around a little bit, but and Zend Framework 3 came out earlier this year, a couple months ago. What are some of the highlights from Zend Framework 3?
The biggest difference is the fact that, as Adam's already alluded to, in 2.5 we split from one huge monolithic repository which contained all the components into, I'd like to say 30 or 40, but it's probably more like 50 or 60 individual repositories which contain
61.
60. There you go. Thank you, Adam. So 61 individual repositories. So previously, the Zend Framework comes with some amazing components. And I would say that I am biased. I have a vested interest being on the community review team. But I genuinely mean that. Like things like Zend Form solve a specific problem really, really well. But in the past, if you only wanted to use Zend Form, you had to pull the whole framework down into your project, which is no longer the case. Mainly... So this means that we can now version components individually and then only release a tag of the entire framework, which is a kind of like a pseudo package, which just says, okay, use Service Manager 3.2, Event Manager 3.1, Form 2.7. So it just means that we don't have to release a whole framework when we just want to kind of release a single component. So I think yesterday you saw Zend Service Manager 3.2 got released on its own, not the whole framework, just the new version of the Service Manager. The reason it's tagged as 3 is because we took the opportunity to make a ton of break-in changes that we wanted to make. Therefore, we have to release a new major version. Things that I'd like to say things that seemed like a good idea at the time is how I kind of fix them, but at the end of the day turned out to be terrible design patterns or just really bad ideas. The break-in changes are really minimal. It's not like an upgrade from Zend Framework 1 to Zend Framework 2, which is less of an upgrade and more of a rewrite your entire application scenario. This is definitely a just tweak the break-in changes, and a lot of them are forward compatible. So if you're using Zend Framework 2, a lot of the components have 2 ways of doing things, the existing way and the new way. So you can kind of preemptively make the changes and then just move over to Zend Framework 3. It's really Zend Framework 3 is definitely based on performance improvements, API improvements, and by that I mean the signature of the methods rather than, the developer API rather than like an kind of HTTP API. Making things easier. Really, it's about developer experience, and that's kind of what we're taking forward throughout the whole of like this iteration of Zend Framework.
Well, and something else I'd kick in there too, with Zend Framework 3, we've done something that we've never done before, and that is our documentation is amazing, and there's a step-by-step, here's how to get from 2 to 3. And that is that's something I can share the link for, but we haven't really done that as well as we should have in the past. So it's nice to see that those things are out there. There's actually a page you can go to see what you need to do to get from Zend Framework 2 to Zend Framework 3 and do it easily.
That's awesome. It sounds like you have quite a bit of backwards compatibility support there. Like Gary, you mentioned that you can do things the old Symphony 2-way or Zend Framework 2. Wow, Zend Framework 2-way, or you can do the Zend Framework 3-way, right? Is backwards compatibility sort of like really embraced there? And
yes,
all right,
yes.
Nice.
Every break and change was thought about and documented and thought about again and then thought about again, and only then, if we really had to make it, was the break and change put in. To be honest, everything that's broken has been broken for a reason. It's not, look, Zend Framework 1 to Zend Framework 2 was a huge mentality shift from, number one, we didn't have namespaces when we had Zend Framework 1, so everything had to be kind of converted to use namespaces. Number two, the whole design from like a front controller to an event-driven MVC meant it was effectively all bets were off, and we just broke everything and said, look, we have to rewrite everything. So let's not try and make the upgrade path easy at this point, because it's never going to be easy whatever happens. So let's just get it right. This time we've added a lot of compatibility layers to make things work. So for example, a really easy example is the Zend Service Manager no longer has a concept of invocables internally, which is just a class that can be created and returned. It doesn't need any configuration. Now, you can still use the Zend Framework two-way, and Zend Service Manager 3 under the hood will wire it up correctly for the new system for you. So, you know, I would definitely recommend people not do that. But if you're trying to piecemeal an application and you just want to get everything working and then you'll go and kind of refactor later, you can do that. So it's definitely a very sensible way to go about releasing a new major version.
I think it's great that Zend does focus on that backwards compatibility, because as I've kind of gone throughout the years as a developer, I really appreciate backwards compatibility more and more. And the Facebook PHP SDK, which is something that I've been contributing to for the past couple of years, is it kind of notoriously been that sort of that redheaded stepchild that they've kind of kicked around and is like, well, like we'll provide something, but we don't really care. But then they kind of delivered it over to the community, and the community has been contributing. And now that we're working on the next kind of major version of it, like the intuition that I have is like, oh, let's just break all the things and make it like perfect, this beautiful like thing that it should have been from the beginning. But really, the reality is that's going to be really bad for everybody who wants to upgrade. So there's like, if the API completely changes all over the place, then like, how are you going to, go through and update all your code? Like, it's just making a big pain and a headache for everyone else. So I really appreciate that. There are developer communities out there that really focus on backwards compatibility. Like in PHP internals is huge on that too. There's definitely a move fast and break things is sort of the mantra I think that was being said around Facebook for a while. So I guess it's that mantra kind of plays out in the open source world as well for them. And so I guess with that mantra, we're kind of like, okay, we'll do that with the SDK too. But at the same time, I'm like, this other part of me is like, no, backwards compatibility is better. So it's kind of definitely a struggle for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a time to break things, right? I mean, there's a time when you say, you know what, technology has just advanced. We have namespaces in PHP. We have a lot of things in PHP now that we didn't before. Especially between version 1 and version 2. So there's definitely a time to break things. I think that as PHP matures as an ecosystem, not just a language and everything else, I think we're finding that less and less. Because the language is so much cleaner than what it used to be, right? For usability on a daily basis. So, but that being said, there are still going to be backwards compatibility breaks here and there. They're just minimal because we as an ecosystem are learning how to handle them better.
Totally. I've almost kind of gotten this idea that if it's a security breaking change, then do it. If it's going to improve security, then break it, kind of thing. But I know that not everybody's sort of in that same vein, but that's what I do. By the way, when I said Symphony earlier, I saw Adam's face, and I think I wet my pants a little bit. It was quite a glare there.
Oh, really?
When I accidentally said Symphony instead of Zend.
I missed it. My son was trying to get my attention off to the side about something, so I was probably actually about that, not about what you were saying.
No.
It's fine. We've stolen so much ideas from Symphony. It doesn't really matter. It's fine.
Yeah,
we're all a big community. We all share things, right? As far as the knowledge goes.
I mean, we've arrived at the same conclusions as Symphony purely by chance, rather than stolen ideas. Sorry, that's not.
That's how that usually goes. I do want to at least talk a little bit about some of the other things other than Zend Framework and internals. Is that you guys have all kinds of things that are out there. The Zend company does, or I should say the Rogue Wave company does, and the Zend product line does. One of the things I did want to actually at least dive into a little bit was this idea of Apigility, which touts itself as being the world's easiest way to create high quality APIs. And I did a little research on this because I hadn't actually used it myself. And the demo that I saw, there was like this little GUI interface that you could use to create endpoints on an API. And you can make nice code connected or DB connected APIs. So basically one that kind of ties directly into your data models that might be in your database, and then one that ties into your source code kind of thing. What is all that?
So Apigility was kind of an answer where, at that time, people in PHP as a huge group were starting to really look at APIs and API first, and having your front end separate from the back end and things. So API at that time, it really was becoming a much more thought about thing. So Apigility was created, and yeah, there is a GUI. So when you put it in develop mode, there's a develop mode and a production mode. I don't know if production mode is the actual term, but either way, it gives you a GUI that you can actually manage the API in the back end and create all the entities and create all the services and the versioning and everything else. You can do that all through a GUI, or you can do it through code if you're geeky that way. But yeah, so I mean, it was created to help people create APIs quickly. And if all you need is a database connected API doing CRUD and some things like that, you can literally create an API in hours, and not even have to touch the code, unless you needed to do something more advanced. It's really a pretty amazing library. Gary, are you play any part in that? I don't know.
No. The first thing is, Sammy, to make it clear, I don't work for Zend, because you keep implying that I work for JetBrains, and I'm incredibly happy. They're an amazing company, and everybody should definitely buy PHP Storm. But with that said, I'm just a volunteer. I'm a contributor to the open source project that is Zend Framework. That's what I do. So I'm on the community review team, and I have the power to merge pull requests and that kind of thing. But Apigility is amazing if you're okay with somebody else's opinions. It's great because, for example, when you install Apigility out of the box, you get really horrible things that you'd have to code yourself, like content negotiation. Like, who wants to have to write their own content negotiation code to check what head has been set and then send back the right content, right? Nobody wants to write that. And it gives you that thing that I always think
back HTML.
Yeah, that's all I really need.
Yeah. Just send them HTML.
Yeah, status code 200, JSON, error.
It's good enough for me and my generation. It's good enough for you kids.
Now, you predate HTTP, so let's not go there. Come on. That thing that I always think of as GLaDOS from Portal, but it's actually like HateOS or whatever. The whole thing about where it adds the links to extra content at the bottom of your JSON package. We'll use JSON because it's what everybody uses. That's all taken care of for you. Error handling's all taken care of for you. Who wants to write all this stuff if you can just take it off the shelf? It really is like definitely something like the Laravel mentality, where I'm gonna research a ton of stuff for you and make decisions on what we think are best practices. And I don't mean we as in myself personally. I mean we as in the open source project maintainers. And we think this is sane defaults and a good way to do things. So if you're happy to do that and take that on trust, or do your own research and say, yeah, you're right, that is a good way to do things, then you just get everything working out of the box. It's really amazing, actually.
That's awesome. In what context do you find Apigility is most, or I should say, Apigility is the best fit?
I don't know that there's a best fit. I mean, anytime somebody says API to me, my first go-to is Apigility. Not that I do Apigility every single time, but my first go-to is that, right? And I don't know that I've used it every single time, and I haven't necessarily found 100% of customers that should use it. But it is a great starting point, and so for some people, it's a great ending point, right? Because it brings in the documentation, the HateOS. I call it HateOS, but those sorts of things. It just gives you everything that an API should have. Versioning. Right out of the box, you have versioning. So that way, if you need to change your API, you create a new version, so the people who are on the previous version still function, and the people on the new version get the new goodness, right? Without having to break things. All these things are done for you in Apigility, so it just makes it really easy for folks to get up and running quickly.
Yeah, for me,
I'm sorry, I wanted to say one.
Go.
Yeah. So I often deal with a lot of companies who say, you know what, we have a Zend Framework 1 or a Zend Framework 2 application. How do we do an API? You know, we want to leverage Angular in a front end, or we want to do something like that, right? And the first words out of my mouth is, well, you know, it's unfortunate you didn't create your API first, right? It's unfortunate you don't have that. But the neat thing about Apigility and the libraries that come with it is you don't have to start Apigility from scratch as one big Apigility application and start from scratch. You can incorporate some of those packages into your Zend application, or any application for that matter. It doesn't have to be Zend. And you can start building an API in conjunction with what you already have. And basically you're taking logic from other places in your application, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. That was what I wanted to say.
Or you can just install Laravel. No, I'm just kidding.
You can absolutely. It's definitely horses for courses, right? With everything that we've got an embarrassment of riches now in 2016 with regards to packages and libraries and frameworks. You know, we've got so much good stuff now that it's definitely almost harder to pick which tool to use than it is to actually sit down and code the damn thing you want to code. But you know, for me, if I wanted to do something that's really lightweight and was solving a very simple problem with an API, I would use something like Slim personally, you know, because it is a fairly big overhead if literally all you want to do is to blast out the last 3 blog posts you did on your blog. Then to have the whole content negotiation and the error handling and the you know, the versioning and all that, you don't really need that. And something like Slim will just give you a lightweight, fast, quick, easy way to do that. Bang, done. If you're looking at something where you will be releasing multiple versions, it's a long, decade-long project that you want to keep in production for a long time, then this is a really, really good way to go. You know, or somewhere in the middle. There's going to be a tipping point where at some point you're going to think, oh, an API can grow to become from simple to complex, and then you go, oh, you know, I do need to make a breaking change. I wish I had versioning. So sometimes even starting with something like Apigility can be a time saver in the long run. But for me, yeah, if you're going to need one of the things that Apigility brings you out of the box, it's worth using.
Now, that being said, Gary kind of segued into using a micro framework to get a application up and running quickly versus using, you know, something like Apigility or a full stack. And Zend's answer to that is expressive, right? So Zend Expressive is very, I don't want to say similar because there are differences between Zend Expressive and Slim, but it is a micro framework like that, using PSR7 as far as the communication and things. And again, if you don't want to go the full boat like Apigility, Zend Expressive is very easy to get an API up and running really quickly on a micro framework versus something larger and heavier.
That's awesome. You mentioned PSR7, which is something I was going to ask you about. I know Matthew Weir-Finney played a big role in PSR7. What was that spurred on by Zend, or was that just sort of Matthew doing his own thing?
Cal, you want to start on that?
Yeah. Well, you and I were both in the FIG during that time frame, but yes, that was basically Matthew. He came out of development of Zend Framework, but he said, hey, this is a new thing, and he had seen it. He'd seen this pattern done elsewhere, and so he started developing it for PHP. And if you look at his blog and his repos, you'll see that the early versions of it were under his name, and then he kind of migrated it. But once he got a reference implementation done, then he started going into working it into Zend Framework, and that's a lot of what Expressive it came out of that PSR7 work, because it's based almost solely on PSR7, if I understand it correctly, right, Adam?
Yeah. Well, I think Matthew had seen some similar things in other communities like Node and stuff like that, and so he was interested in coming up with some sort of PHP side of that. And again, I may be totally wrong in what I'm saying here, but I think Strategily and Deoctorus came out of those, and then those later on became, you know, the idea behind PSR7. And then, you know, Matthew realized pretty quickly, you know, this should be something that we use for interoperability, and that's how it hit the FIG, right? Because interoperability is what the FIG was about, and so that's where that came about. Other than
while
what,
Matthew did drive it, let's not minimize the contributions of others. I mean, when it came time for the vote, I was the one that actually counted the votes and tweeted them out. So, hey, I did my part.
well, I think Bo Simonson also had a good hand in that,
Oh, yeah.
and some other people in the community. Yeah, I mean, it was once everybody got their hands on PSR7, there was the concept of it and the idea of it. I think it kind of grew a life of its own, as well as Matthew driving it.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate that Matthew's in a position at Zend to be able to do these kind of things as part of his day job. I mean, we as a community, as a PHP community, because that could easily have just gone away when it started, and then it stuttered, and then the original authors wanted to step back, and then it just stagnated for a while. And I think Matthew is the kind of person who likes to look and see what's going on in other languages, in other communities, and he could see the need for this modeling of the HTTP message. And I mean, he did a ton of work, but I think Matthew did that as Matthew rather than as a Zend Framework employee originally, because that's the kind of person he is. It was self-serving in a way, because it was obviously going to be useful for future iterations of Zend Framework. I'm not trying to say that, but he gets a lot of freedom at Zend to do what he thinks is right. So yeah, we're very fortunate that he can do that, to be fair.
Rogue Wave.
Well, I mean, that's
whatever.
Again, not to toot our own horn too much, but Zend and now Rogue Wave has always been very much that way, right? Any way that they can help community, they do contribute a lot of stuff back. I mean, recently in some recent versions of PHP, now have the opcode, and from Zend Optimizer is there as part of the core now. So, Zend has always contributed in that way. They've always been pretty good to us.
Well, it's definitely getting to that point where we need to start wrapping up a little bit. But I did want to hit on like two little points that just to kind of wrap things up. Zend Certified Engineer, ZCE. Cal Evans is the one who coaxed me into taking the official test at where was that? That was at ZendCon, actually.
ZendCon, yeah.
Yeah. That was intense. That was awesome. Yep. Thank you for allowing me to have that experience. So what is that? Why would I want to be certified? Why can I not talk about it? I'm afraid I'm already said too much.
No. First of all, I have to say, I know whether you passed or failed.
I know I know the answer. Don't worry.
But
it was a fail.
No,
big F.
It's not a matter of we can't talk about it. We certainly can't talk about it. We don't talk about how we build it and what's involved in it. Matter of fact, when you agree to take the test, part of the agreement is you won't talk about the questions on there, because we don't want somebody going out and just putting up a website and says, here's the questions. That minimizes the effectiveness of it. But the Zend Certified Engineer is this is changing. It used to be, do you know this version of PHP? And we started with 4, and we had 5 and 5.3 and 5.5. But with the one that we'll be releasing probably in February, because things have been moving a little slow because of the holidays, we're refocusing on, do you understand how to program PHP? And we're focusing much less on specific features that have been released in a version of the language, and more around, do you understand the concepts and the best practices as we know them right now? And so that's where it's going. And we have we've just finished 6 months worth of work on getting it updated, and we are very pleased with where it is. And we're in the process of handing it off to our partner who delivers it for us, Pearson VUE. And if you purchase a certificate, then you will go to Pearson VUE, a training center, and they have them worldwide, and you will take it. As to why you want to do it, well, very simply, it does prove you understand the basics of PHP and the best practices. I mean, that's what we test you on. We do our dead level best to, number one, make sure that there are no trick questions in there. There are hard questions, but there are no trick questions that we are aware of. And when I say we, I don't mean just Zend. I mean the entire panel of people that put this together. But we also try to make it difficult enough so that back in the 90s, kids back in the 90s, Microsoft certifications, you used to be what we call paper tigers, okay? Because honestly, if you paid the $3,000 to take this specific course, then they told you, they almost basically taught the test. Everything you need to know, you could walk out, you could take the test, and the certifications weren't worth much for a long time. Now, Microsoft has since changed them, and they are worth an awful lot. But back then, they weren't worth a lot. We want to make sure we don't run into that. We want to make sure that they actually do test for real knowledge, real world problems. And we want to make sure that when you put that, you earn that logo. When you put that logo on your resume, people or employers look at it and say, oh, okay, you cared enough about your career to go out and prove to me that you can do this.
And that's something that I tell folks when they ask me, you know, what is this PHP certification thing? Is it really worth my while? Or something along that line. And I explain it this way: is the PHP certification exam isn't something that you take to then be able to say, I'm an architect, I know everything there is to know about PHP. On the other side, what it really is a way for an employer to say, okay, you passed the test, you know enough to work on my project. You know, or you know enough that I know you can at least get started on my project and learn from there, right? That's more or less what it is. It's just a way to say, I know enough. It's not, I know everything.
And I can say, as I've played the role of hiring manager for many years in my career, hiring developers in various languages. And while a certification is never the, oh, you're certified, I will hire you, it is a signal, and it's a positive signal. When I look at a resume, it might make the difference between you getting a call and not getting a call. If your resume is, I can't really tell, but oh, you've got the certification, okay, it's worth a call. So it's one signal. It is not the end all be all of signals, but it is one positive signal that you can send to employers that say, not only, yes, I know this, but I care enough about my career to invest in it.
Well, I look forward to taking it again because I know I failed. So I'm gonna go at it again with armed with more knowledge this time. So
I do appreciate you being part of the beta. At ZendCon this year, we gave the beta of the new test, and Sammy was one of 3 core developers that were actually in the room taking the test with us. And I think we had like 20 people total, and it was for me, it was a great experience because I haven't given that test in quite some time. I used to proctor them at conferences back in 2005, early 2006. We used to do it, but it's been a long time since I've had that experience.
You did a fantastic job facilitating that test, and the thing that most impressed me was the fact that you were able to keep Sarah Goldman from trolling too much during the test.
I wish I could show Sarah's notes on the test, because not only did she take the test, but there were questions where she was actually giving us notes on it. You know,
nice.
It was quite funny.
That's awesome. One last thing to wrap this thing up, ZendCon. We've been talking about it on and off, but that's one of the big events from Zend. And there's lots of elephants. I feel like every year there's a new elephant, right? That's being produced.
So we have been doing that. We've been creating an elephant over the last few ZendCons, and it's a fun thing for us internally because we know how everybody loves them, and you know, it's a cool thing. This past year we had the rock and roll elephant, which is reminiscent of Elvis, right? So. You know, and the year prior to that, we had the PHP 7 one, and in different years we have different ones. So it's something I have fun with, and I know the rest of the company does as well.
Any pointers about, or what should I say? What's the word I'm looking for? Where you there's a secret, and then you give them like a little teaser. Oh, teaser! Any teasers about the next elephant for?
Yeah, we're in the planning stages for the next one, so just stay tuned. We'll announce if when something comes up.
Okay,
I've lobbied to have the next elephant have reader glasses.
Nice. Actually, there was one, right? The one had the spirally eyes.
Yeah, we had the Z-Ray googly eye one a few years ago, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I don't have one of those, so if anyone has a spare they'd like to donate, then I'm definitely grateful to receive them.
Same here.
He's right up there.
There's so many that I need to collect still. There's actually I've got quite a few of the rock and roll ones from the ZendCon because I've got to hand one. I've got to get one to Davey Shafik, and then a couple are for the user group here because Adam is amazing and he let the user group leaders take extras to give to their group.
Yeah, if they don't get there, I won't trust you ever again.
I know. I've even had several offers to trade them. I'm like, nope. If I trade this, I will be forever
You'll be
marked as the
blacklisted
person
from
who can't be
elephants.
Exactly. So that about wraps it up because it's getting about that time to wrap it up. I do want to give a huge shout out to Chris Shaw, the long-time show notes contributor who contributed the show notes in Markdown to the show notes repo, which is at github.com/PHP Roundtable. There's the show notes repo there. Chris Shaw has contributed episode 54, which is the security episode about encryption hashing in PHP. And episode 55, which is acceptance testing with Behat, and episode 56, hourly versus value-based pricing. So a lot of show notes there. And we have a new show notes contributor also contributing, Peter Keller, who contributed episode 34, which was debugging is more than var dump. That was actually one that you were on, Gary. He contributed show notes that you said stuff about.
I don't remember that.
So thank you so much, Peter Keller and Chris Shaw. And if you're interested in contributing to the show notes, it's just it's a GitHub repo. Feel free to just contribute, and I'll give you a shout out live here on the air. And I typically wrap this thing up with a developer shout out, which is my favorite segment because it recognizes somebody in the community for being amazing for what they're doing. We're not doing it because the long-term sponsor for the developer shout-out, Laracast, is now sending advertising dollars into some other areas, which is awesome. And I just want to give one more big shout-out to Laracast.com for contributing for so long. We've sent out, close to $2,000 in gift cards to developers who have been awesome. And I've got a little bit of a backlog from developer shoutouts. I haven't sent them out since September, so I'm sorry if you haven't got your developer shoutout. It is coming. I'm going to do it today, write all these developer shoutouts and send them out. But thank you so much, Laracast, for sponsoring for so long. If you're interested in sponsoring the developer shoutout, 100% of the proceeds goes to the developer that is getting shouted out to, and it's just $50 for an Amazon gift card. So if your company is interested in sponsoring, definitely hit me up I'm Sammy at I think it's Sammy K at phproundtable.com. Just go to phproundtable.com and fill out the form.
I forget my email address.
I don't know. I have so many of them. I just get so confused. I do want to wrap things up with a shameless plug. I forgot to mention, oh yeah, you got shameless plug, but you guys have all been on this show before. So who wants to start with the shameless plug first?
I'll go first.
I was about to say Kyle knows. He's ready.
I know. If you are a speaker or you want to be a speaker, if you're a developer and looking to get into speaking at user groups or conferences, I've got a brand new book it's been out a month or two now, called Spin a Good Yarn. And it is at the horrible URL spin-a-good-yarn.com. Or you can just Google it or visit my blog and you'll find it. But I had a lot of fun writing it. I've been doing this for about 10 years, and I just basically rolled everything I could think of into a book, and it was a lot shorter than I thought, but still, I've put together everything I know about crafting a talk, about presenting a talk, and about your duties and responsibilities as a speaker. So give it a look if you would.
Excellent. Adam, you got anything you want to promote?
So a couple of things, if I may. I got Sunshine PHP coming up in February in Miami. And if
come sweat with us in Miami.
Yeah, there are worse places you can be in February than Miami. So come down and see us. Also wanted to give a shout out about my podcast, Run Geek Radio. Check it out, and I got some new episodes coming out. So thank you.
Awesome. What about you, Gary? You got anything?
Yeah, I'm not going to. I've already shamelessly plugged PHP Storm, so that's done. I can bill for this hour to JetBrains now, so I don't need to do that. But what I will do, I would like to plug my own podcast, which I do with Chris Tankersley. It's not a development podcast; it's a gaming podcast. and it's called Jerks Talk Games, and you can find it at jerkstalkgames.com.
And you can listen to episode 2, I think, and hear me play Pokemon Go in the background.
Yes, you can. Episode 4. Yes, you can.
Episode 4.
My parents bombed the episode at ZendCon.
That's right. It was at ZendCon.
It was.
Good times, good times. So we have a couple of episodes that I've been trying to schedule. There's the PHP 7.1, which has been back and forth and going through scheduling problems like every other episode in the whole world that I've been trying to get out there. But it is coming up maybe early January, depending on how things work out. And there's also a new episode that I just put on the list, HTTP plug, Guzzle and APIs. We're going to be talking about some of these libraries and client libraries for interacting with APIs. So that should be interesting. And we're going to have a PHP Fig 3.0 episode. There's lots of voting going on in the Fig right now. There's lots of changes happening. So we're going to have a lot of Fig members come on and talk about the new changes, probably early February when all that stuff starts getting settled down. And eventually we're going to have the logging and crash reporting episode that we've been talking about for a couple of months now and have yet to put out there. But it's going to happen with scheduling, without the scheduling conflict. So if you have an idea that you want to present to the world, please visit phproundtable.com. Fill out the form that says, I want to join the roundtable. I'd love to have you on this thing. Always open to ideas. A lot of the ideas that we actually end up doing on the PHP Roundtable aren't my own ideas. They're from people like you, the listener, who is listening in your car, and you're like, I want to see a PHP Roundtable about this thing, or I know a lot about this thing, or I know a little bit about this thing. I want to be on the roundtable to talk about it. Let's do it. So hit me up. We'll get you on. I'd like to thank Adam, Cal, and Gary all for joining us in this episode, and we'll see you kids in the next episode.